Hello everyone, my name is Emily, and today I'm going to be bringing to you a full and complete tutorial of everything you need to know about watercolors. This is some of the stuff I wish I would have known when I first started using them, including different ways to work with the paint and different applied methods. When I first started painting, I felt like I was given these random sets of rules with no explanation as to why they were in place, so I'm here to help you guys understand what they mean. Now remember, art is subjective. There is no right or wrong way to create a damn thing. Whoever tells you that there is can go ahead and take a pipe to their hole and go fuck themselves. Now, I am what would be considered a professional artist. That is to say, I'm able to support myself with my trade. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I know all there is to know about watercolors, and it also doesn't mean that what I do know is 100% definitively the way to go. These are just some very basic guidelines to help you improve while on your watercolor journey. The rest of the job is up to you and what you discover on your own. Unless you give up, then I don't know, guess you don't get anything. Watercolor paints. Watercolors come in full pans, half pans, and tubes. They can also come in pencil and stick form. But because I'm a piece of shit, I won't be focusing on these last two. Maybe another video. Most high-end watercolors can be bought individually, so you can create your own palette, but you can also purchase pre-made palettes. If you're going to be making your own palette, I recommend the following colors: a cool and warm yellow, lemon yellow being a cool yellow, and cadmium yellow being a warm yellow, a cool and warm blue, phthalo blue being a cool blue, and ultramarine blue being a warm blue, a cool and warm red, carmine red being a cool red, and cadmium red being a warm red, and a violet. If you anticipate drawing more floral designs, I recommend getting a pre-made brown like a burnt umber as well. If you're looking to budget yourself, you can't go wrong with the primary colors. I recommend lemon yellow, carmine red, and ultramarine blue. In my experience, these colors mix incredibly well. Obviously they're primaries, but they make the least muddiest violet, orange, and green. Don't forget to protect your masterpiece behind UV-safe glass or use a UV protectant spray or sealant. The one pictured here is not UV protective and was the closest thing I could find in the house. I wasn't about to go out and buy more fucking shit for this video. I'm not made of fucking money! Shit! Remember, not all watercolors are light fast. The definition of light fast is a paint, pigment, or dye that is not prone to fading or discoloration when exposed to light. How light fast a color is can be measured in Roman numerals, numbers, letters, and sometimes even star ratings. Watercolor grades. Watercolors come in 3 different archival types or grades. Professional watercolors are made with a large amount of pigment. Usually the ideal is to have a color that is made of a single pigment. This makes it a lot smoother when mixing with other colors. Sometimes colors cannot be made with a single pigment and need to have a few combined. Student grade colors tend to have a lot of filler in them and not have as much pigment as professional colors do. They are typically not as light fast as professional watercolors, and they may use hues or dyes. They also aren't as vibrant sometimes and can be a little bit veiny. I am not even trying to be funny here, they can actually leave little veins. I would say get your head out of the gutter, but it would appear I may have possibly trained you to expect that from me, so, you know. Penis! Also keep in mind some hues can exist in professional sets as well, because some pigments have been mined to fucking death, so we can't get them anymore. When you see hue, when purchasing paints in particular, it usually means it's just a blend of pigments or dyes to create a particular color. Hue literally just means a shade of a color. Manganese blue and Indian yellow are good examples of colors that used to use now dodo bird level of extinct pigments. The final grade is something I've heard called elementary grade, which I rather like, but I prefer to call them drugstore grade. These watercolors are typically made with just dye and come in very dry, chalky cakes. They usually have 0 archival value and are usually very inexpensive. They do, however, get the job done and can be worked with. I used my set since I was 13, and even when I started getting serious about watercolors, I continued to use them. The set I'm using here is just absolute shit. This is the original set I got when I was just 13 years old, and the only reason I have it is for nostalgia's sake. There are other drugstore brands that I recommend over this one. For instance, I've heard a lot of good things about prong watercolors. Different pigments can be identified in different ways. It's fairly self-explanatory. PW is pigment white, PB is pigment blue, PY is pigment yellow, and so on and so forth. If you can't figure that out, well, I don't know what you're doing with your life. Get on the watercolor train. Paint behavior. Like light-fast ratings, there are other ways of telling how certain colors will behave. Watercolors are what they are because they use the white of the paper to add a very light and airy quality to your artwork. Other more opaque mediums can't do this. This means that they are a transparent medium. Watercolors can come in more opaque forms, however, and there is usually an indication of this when you research each color. All colors are available in transparent, semi-transparent, semi-opaque, and opaque. This is usually indicated by a square symbol. My examples are as follows. For transparent, I chose transparent yellow, obviously. For semi-transparent, I chose magenta. For semi-opaque, I chose scarlet red. And for opaque, I chose cobalt turquoise. If you can't figure out if a color is more opaque or transparent, try painting over a black line, or in this case, a black heart. If it's more transparent, the heart will boldly show through. If it's more opaque, the heart may appear cloudy. Like my heart. I have no room for love. Oh, yeah. If you have a color that you want to make opaque, you can add white to it. Watercolor traditionalists, elitists, try to avoid using white as it defeats the purpose of using watercolors in the first place. But there are occasions where it makes sense, i.e. to make smog, haze, or smoke. Smoke, if you fucking know what I mean, man. It's 420 blazes. Don't be afraid, Dad. Watercolors can also be measured by how much they stain. This is usually measured by a triangle symbol. An example of a low staining color would be manganese violet. A semi-staining color would be May green, and Prussian blue apparently stains like a motherfucker, so there's that. General rules. Here are a few general rules that pertain to the use of the watercolor medium. Try to avoid using white to make a color lighter, especially if you aren't intending to add any additional opacity to your piece. Try adding more water to your paint to make the color lighter instead. A common trait in watercolor painting is to not cover all parts of white on the page and to let the paper act as the lightest part of your piece. Instead of adding white at the end, the idea is to leave the area blank so the paper can do that job for you. I tend to add very tiny details of white afterward with a gel pen, but I will typically leave larger areas of white alone to make it easier for myself. Another kind of stupid no-no is adding black to your piece. Who are making all these rules, by the way? Can I just stop for a second? I don't fucking know, but you don't have to follow any of them. This is just me regurgitating what has been beaten into me since the day I started this fucking massacre. Racist ass motherfucking rules. Can't add black. That's bullshit! If you're going to add black to your piece, most people think the best way is to mix the black yourself, which makes it look more organic. Can I just... One more thing. Can I just say, when people say, this looks organic about watercolor, it just really confuses me and fucking pisses me off. Organic? Really? Bitch, what about this looks organic? Is it breathing? Is it moving? Is it pooping? Get the fuck out of here with this shit. This is watercolors. This ain't a game, bitch! Anyway, if I end up adding black, I will typically use ivory black and add a touch of red or blue to make sure it fits with the color scheme of my work. If my piece is cooler, I will make it blue-black, obviously, and if it's warmer, I will make it more of a red-black. To mix a black, you will need to mix the primary colors together. I usually mix mostly blue, then a bit of red and a touch of yellow, and adjust accordingly. If I want to make it a bit darker, I will use less water and more pigment. Try experimenting with different temperatures of the primaries to see what kinds of tones of blacks you can get. Oh, here's another fuck you rule. Apparently, it's frowned upon to pull the pigment straight out of the pan because the colors seem less organic. There's that fucking word again. But I do it all the time because I'm a lazy fucking cow. Sue me, bitch. Sue me over watercolors. Let's see how far that fucking gets you in court. Materials. Brushes. Now let's move on to talking about some materials we will need to start painting. You could totally just use your hands and some spit, but I would seriously question your mental capacity if that were the case. Like, a little spit is fine for certain types of flash painting, but like a full jar, it seems like it would be just very exhausting. Most people tend to use round brushes as they are very universal, but there are several other types of brushes you can use. You can either purchase synthetic hair brushes, mixed hair brushes, or 100% real hair brushes. Kolinsky Sable is the real fancy shit and will usually hold the most water. I found a lot of success with all three types, but my favorite has to be the Black Velvet Silver round brushes. They are a mix of synthetic and squirrel hair, hold a lot of water, are very reasonably priced, and come to a very fine point. Most brushes can be brought to a fine point by first getting them wet and then tapping them gently on the back of your hand. This is also a great way to get water everywhere. Materials. Paper. For paper, you can purchase a few different options. Hot press, cold press, which is the most common, and finally, rough texture. Cold press usually has a bit of grit and texture to it and doesn't have a real smooth surface. Different companies have different textures. My favorite is the Strathmore 300 series watercolor paper. If this were a woman, it would be Scarlett Johansson. Hot press is usually very smooth. With watercolor paper, it usually has a touch of texture to it in order to help absorb the water and grip your brush, but still is much more smooth than cold press. The final texture is rough, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Just rough. Rough like a man who hasn't shaved in a few days. Or like high grit sandpaper. How my thighs feel after I go for a run. Just rough. Just a very large area of texture. How to paint. Application. Now let's get to painting. To start painting, most watercolor artists will pick up some paint and place it either on the lid of the palette or on a separate dish. I prefer to use porcelain dishes as the color spreads and sticks to them instead of staying on my brush. This makes it a touch easier to mix colors together. Just try to make more than enough of the color you need because it's very difficult to match the color again. This is true because watercolor dries a lot lighter than when it's first placed on the paper. It's a compulsive liar and will consistently let you down. It's like a guy who's really nice when you first meet him, but calls your mom a stinky, smelly heifer after a few dates. So, but we love him! We can change him, I swear! You can apply the color in a few different ways, such as wet into wet and wet into dry. Wet into wet is done where water is placed down first and you add pigment on top. This helps reduce blotchiness and allows the pigment to flow effortlessly across the page. I recommend this method with large areas of color. You can do several effects with this application, such as blooms, ombres, and gradients. Wet into dry is simply applying a wet brush to a dry surface. You can get interesting effects if you don't pick up a ton of water on your brush, such as strokes like this. This is called dry brushing, not to be confused with going in dry. I literally never recommend doing that, ever, with any hole, especially the back one. It's very tender. Just don't do that, please. How to paint. Techniques. There are endless ways to paint with watercolor, and each technique works differently for every artist. But here are a few widely known ways to use watercolor. Layering. This technique is pretty self-explanatory. You lay down one flat color at a time, let them dry, and then layer another on top. Almost every single technique comes back to layering, as this is sort of the whole point to watercolors. Make sure not to fuck up like I did here and apply two wet colors too close to one another. If you do this, they will bleed into one another and possibly mess up your drawing. Don't forget, this is definitely a wet medium. Not that I'd expect you to forget, it's in the fucking name. Pooling. This is a little less common, but is something a lot of watercolor artists inadvertently do. To apply this technique, you will pull excess water into areas of the piece that tend to be darker or in shadow. Feel free to add additional colors and watch them bloom as the paint dries. Dragging. This is a technique I use in the majority of my paintings. I first lay down my solid layers, then when I add another layer, I use a brush with clean water to drag the colors out where I want them to go. This helps create a gradient from light to dark. Lifting. I also use this technique often. After you lay down your color while the paint is still wet, you can use a cotton bud, a paper towel, or any other absorbent material to pull the color up. This leaves even more white of the paper to show through. You can also do this after the color has dried by scrubbing the area a little with the brush, but depending on the staining power of the color, it may not have as much of a drastic effect. Flash. This is actually a form of designing tattoo art, but I thought I'd include it for a fun little addition. You will need waterproof India ink for this technique and will be starting with your darks instead of your lights. Lay down a bit of ink and then, using the dragging technique, pull the ink out to create a gradient. The ink should be coming from areas of shadow in order to avoid oversaturating the piece. Once that is finished and dry, you can add a solid layer of colors on top of this. You can also add a few midtones to help the transition from dark to light. This technique usually looks best with non-human subjects that aren't highly detailed. Now that my mouth feels drier than my own sense of humor, I can comfortably say that I've told you everything I know about watercolor paints. I hope this helped you guys out. It took a lot of effort to compile everything I know, and I wrote a fucking script. I wrote a script. How crazy is that? Me. Script. 7 pages. Holy shit. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and don't forget to stay out of trouble. See you guys later.